Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Morris. I'm the Associate Director of Art Angel, welcoming you to this evening's event, organized in collaboration with Senate House Library and the School of Advanced Study. Running through the year, we'll be holding a series of climate conversations. This evening's is the first. And these events will bring together leading climate scientists and environmental thinkers with exceptional writers and artists of all kinds. So I'm particularly excited to introduce the climatologist Friederike Otto and the writer Janette Winterson. Freddie Otto is Senior Lecturer in Climate Science at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College. Angry Weather is Freddie's most recent publication, and at the center of the book is an examination of the unfolding story of Hurricane Harvey, which swept through Texas in 2017, causing more than 100 deaths and $125 billion of damage. Freddie is also the co-lead of World Weather Attribution, WWA, a kind of climate forensics measuring the influence of climate change on extreme weather events, such as we experienced on Monday and Tuesday here in London. From 1994's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit to last year's 12 Bites on the implications of AI, Janette Winterson's honesty, originality, and integrity has inspired and compelled countless readers. She's the author of more than 24 books, in print as many different countries, novels, memoirs, essays, and stories of all kinds. Since 2013, Janette has also been Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Manchester, not far from Accrington, where she grew up. But that's another story. Please welcome Janette Winterson and Freddie Otto.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Before we start, I've just got a question to ask. Well, I've got two questions. First of all, can you hear me? I think you must be on there as well, mustn't you? Fine.
Yeah, me too.
We're on? Yeah.
Good.
We're on. Because I was brought up in a gospel tent, this question is relevant to me. So it's a hands-up question, which of course you always ask if you're in a gospel tent trying to save souls. Is there anybody here who is uncertain that climate change is a man-made phenomenon? Oh, good. So we don't.
Phew.
We just wondered. So we don't have to save anybody. We were really thinking that we might have to do that because you never know who's in the audience. So that's good to know that nobody's come from Donald Trump tonight. I'm very excited to be here talking to Freddie because really you've got to read this book, Angry Weather. If you're interested in climate change, it's how we got here, how we might get out of being here. It's so readable, which is what I love about it, because probably like lots of you, I will read a number of worthy books about climate change, climate science, and wade through them dutifully. And a lot of them are so turgid, or they follow terrible formulas that the publishers have told these poor persons who can't write and never should have written in their entire life, how to tell a human story. Freddie just does this. So this book, it's clear, it's straightforward, it doesn't dumb anything down. It gives you all the information you need, and I think it gives you the hope that you need as well. But we'll come to that in the last third. So I want you all to buy one on the way out. But one of the things in here that I love, which is such a straightforward question, but nothing I've read ever just answered it so straightforwardly, which is, well, what's the difference between weather and climate? Are they the same thing? How do they work together?
Well, climate is average weather.
Average weather?
Yes. So weather is, well, there's always this, weather is the everyday expression of climate. So climate gives you the frame, the possible weather, and then weather is what we experience on any given day. So it's not the same, but it's also, of course, closely related. So you can't say, like Trump says, oh, that's just weather, because weather doesn't happen independent of the climate. And of course, so that means that when you change the climate, that does affect the weather.
Right. And that's what we're seeing. So what we're seeing now, this week, I mean, what a week to be having this conversation, folks. I mean, imagine if this had been Tuesday, none of us would be here, would we? But we saw what happened in England. We've never seen temperatures like this. We've never felt temperatures like this in England, have we? And anybody who's as old as I am sort of still remembers going to the seaside in July in your duffel coat, which is what all English people had to do, and you just shivered your way and paddled along the sands. But that's never going to come back, is it? Are those days gone when you'd wear a duffel coat in England in July?
There might be the odd day where you need the duffel coat, but they will get rarer and rarer and rarer and are now real extreme events.
So is there any going back,
No.
say, to there isn't?
No.
To generationally then, the world, it depends how old you are, I suppose. So my world, as a child growing up in the 1960s with that weather, so snow at Christmas very often. I'm from the north, so I had no choice. You know, ice on the inside of your house, freezing in July, always raining in the summer. That's why people went to Lanzarote, isn't it? They were so excited they could get some sun in summer, which was really unknown in England. So that's gone forever.
That's gone forever. That's, well, forever. Ever is a very long word,
but
but it's gone for the next centuries, for sure.
So there's no point standing around like we do saying, oh, this is a hot summer, or gosh, we haven't had any frost in November this year. And we still say that with surprise, don't we? And we look for it. We still wonder if it's coming. So we got to get over that.
Yes, we got to get over it. We got to get over it saying that, well, what we see now is kind of, we have moved, we somehow have moved from climate change doesn't exist to, oh my God, this is climate change, we're doomed. So I think that we have gone straight from denying that is happening to, oh my God, it's too late, and now we can't do anything anymore. And of course, we can't go back, but that doesn't mean that we don't have any agency to do something about it.
But it is correct, isn't it, as you say, that we're not talking about Donald Trump, no, or his cohorts, but by and large, all of the people who say climate change isn't real, or if it is real, it's got nothing to do with us, and it's not as real as everybody says it is. We've passed that point, haven't we? Most people now, even the oil companies, seem to be saying, well, it is real.
Yes, at least, I think, most of them have slowly died out,
Yeah. So what's being argued about now is how we fix it, how we manage it, how we deal with it.
Whether it is a problem, I'm not sure I would say that the oil companies are really, well, they usually now have two companies, one that is shiny and green and has all the adverts, and one that's dirty and does what it used to do all the time. So it's still there. It's just not open denial. It's sort of just doing what they always did in the background and talking a different talk at the front.
Right, because I was reading, I mean, it was something that I found which I was so astonished by. See if you can guess what you think about this. You'll know straight away, so you can't answer. All right, so here's a quote, all right? There is general scientific agreement that the most likely manner in which mankind is influencing the global climate is from carbon dioxide release from the burning of fossil fuels. Simple sentence. There are some potentially catastrophic events that must be considered. Man has a time window of 5 to 10 years before the need for hard decisions in energy strategies becomes critical. Who wants to guess the decade when that was written? When do you think that was written? General scientific agreement that the most likely manner in which mankind is influencing the global climate is from carbon dioxide release from the burning of fossil fuels. Yeah, it's the 1970s. And where does it come from? Pardon? Nope. That was right. No. Who do you think would give? I'll tell you. It's 1970s. It's from ExxonMobil, from their own scientists, internal memos which have finally been found and pored over. So they knew in 1970.
Yeah, I think
they are the worst of the worst, aren't they, ExxonMobil?
Well, I think they even knew in the 60s, right, and then have actively decided not to well, to discredit scientists who would talk about it publicly.
And you, as a climate scientist, I mean, because you're a different generation, you weren't working then to try and combat this stuff, because fortunately you weren't alive. Now, do you find that the work that you're doing is met not with skepticism, not with derision, not with hostility, but with people saying to you, yes, we need to hear what you're doing. We need to know what the solutions might be. We need to even know what the problems are. Because with your world weather attribution that you're doing, which I'd love you to tell everybody about, you're trying to work so much faster than normal climate scientists have done, aren't you? And just to look at weather events, you started with Hurricane Harvey, and say, all right, what's going on here? And to try and get stuff out in real time to people before all the climate deniers and the fiction writers, not the ones like me, the ones who are employed by big companies for much more than I will ever make, but before those guys get on the story and spin it and twist it. We're out there trying to say, look, this is what's happening, this is what's real, this is how we can talk about it. What are you meeting as you're doing that out in the world?
It has changed a lot. So when we started to do world weather attribution, it was precisely, as you said, so when weather events happen, when extreme events happen, people talk about it. People always love to talk about extreme weather events, and there was the question around, has climate change anything to do with it? And at that point in time, everyone said something about it. Everyone had an opinion about it, and said yes or no or whatever. Everyone but the scientific community. So climate scientists did not comment on this, or if they did, they were saying things like, well, yeah, you can't say from one specific weather event whether that's climate change or not, but it's kind of the thing that we would expect, which is, it's not the kind of thing that you need to really change a debate or to convince anyone that things are happening. And so that's why we founded World Weather Attribution and said, well, we can't, and when scientists said something, it was, well, they did then a study that takes maybe 6 months or so after the event had happened, and then they submitted that to a peer-reviewed journal, and then it takes about a year or so to go through peer review, and then 2 years after the event happened, then you have an answer, maybe. And then, of course, 20 other extreme events have happened, the world has moved on, the discussion has been forgotten. And that's why we said, okay, we have to change this. This is really not that everyone with any opinion says something about the role of climate change, but there is no evidence in the discussion, and the people who could provide that evidence are not saying anything. And so that's when we decided, well, we can do these studies faster. We don't have to take 6 months. We can just, get a big team together, drop everything else, and make sure that we can do this within a week or within 2 weeks, so that we can provide scientific evidence while the discussion is still happening. And that's what we did with World Weather Attribution. Yeah. And at the beginning, that was met with a lot of skepticism from the scientific community, but we then spent the last 10 years almost, after every study that we did fast, we then redid the study slowly with different data, different models, and submitted to peer review to see, well, do our results stand the test of time? Does it go through peer review? And we, well, the pros always change dramatically from the fast reports to the slower ones. The numbers were always the same. So the numbers, so we could prove to the scientific community that this is still real science, even though we do it fast.
And so there's now no resistance to doing it fast.
Well, I wouldn't say no resistance, but very much less resistance than there was.
Because we were talking earlier about the problems with joined up thinking, well, around every area where science is involved, because people have their separate silos of expertise. And often these things are just looked at in isolation, whatever it is, whether it's medicine or climatology. But the real world doesn't operate like that. The real world is a joined up system, isn't it? And when I first started thinking about weather right back in the early 80s, because I was reading James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis, and he was just laughed out of the room at that point, because he was saying, look, no, the Earth it seeks homeostasis, it's seeking to be a steady state system, it works in equilibrium, it works as a whole or not at all. And that was so unfashionable then. It was seen as like just hippie shit thinking. With everybody doing the Enlightenment projects, sorts of science, no, everything must be atomized, everything must be studied under the microscope just as it is, nothing must be joined up, which always seemed to me, I don't even know if it's a gender business, because we'll talk about that later. I just thought, this is completely mad. The world does not work like this. The world works as a system or not at all. Where all of us, humans, animals, plants, weather, it's all interacting. And I think if you're on the, for me as a thinker, because everything I do is about bringing together lots of different things and then trying to make a new whole out of them. But it interested me when you were talking earlier that you cannot peer review something if it brings in too many other things, because as you said, you've got to get loads of experts in who've all got to review it differently from their own expertise, haven't you? So then that takes forever.
That is definitely one of the big problems that you have to when you try to do real interdisciplinary science, because science is the peer review process. The scientific method is that you write something that is then scrutinized by your peers. That sort of is the essence of science. And so it also is, for good reason, one of the most important things that ensure that not too much stuff is published that is completely wrong, which of course that it only works to a degree, but it's still, I think, for good reasons really important. And I can understand also why there was so much resistance to us doing something outside of peer review and calling it science. So that it's a really important process, but it also is, it is basically that the people doing science decide what science is. And so changing that is incredibly difficult, because people who are traditionally scientists are, old white men. And so old white men decide and they peer review what science is. So you said we talk about gender later, so we can talk about gender later, but it's also people who have been trained in a single discipline decide that what they have learned when they were trained is what is science. And so that is perpetuated, because that's the people who review the papers. And so it's incredibly difficult to change things, or it's incredibly slow to change things. And if you want to do interdisciplinary science and bring things together, then you have maybe one reviewer who is a physicist and one reviewer who's a social scientist. And one loves what you've done and thinks it's brilliant. The other one thinks it's completely bullshit. And so then you can be lucky and say the editor sort of can bring it together. But in most cases, you're not. And so that's why this trying to really do new science or bring scientific disciplines really together is really hard.
Do you think it should change?
I think it has to change, but it's not super obvious how to change it fast. And I think it is changing, because I think now, at least with younger scientists, it's quite common that you have training in sort of different disciplines. You don't. So when I studied physics, and then I did my PhD in philosophy of science, and then I was completely unemployable in Germany, because that's not what you do. If you're a physicist, you have to do a PhD in physics, and then you can work in physics. If you're a philosopher, you have to do everything in philosophy, and then you can maybe get a job in philosophy. Whereas in the UK at that point, it was much more common that people did different disciplines and then combined them. So I think it is changing, but it's really, really slow.
So you've really put yourself out there, haven't you? I mean, not just to help us understand weather and climate better, but to say there might be a different way of doing science. Because if you don't do it like this, every bullshitting prat in the world, as soon as there's an event, will come in and say whatever they like, won't they?
Well, yes, that was exactly the case when we started doing this.
And nobody has to check anything. They can just go get an editorial in a national newspaper the next day with whatever. I mean, Jonathan Franzen recently published something in the New Yorker, which was so dreadful. It was really doomsterishness, saying, you know, we are all doomed. There's nothing we can do, and here's my facts, which were all wrong. The New Yorker is supposed to fact check, but you can get away with a lot more if there is no peer review, can't you?
Yes, yes, and if in cases like extreme weather events, if the scientific community said you can't attribute individual weather events to climate change, and the BBC had this line written and given to every single journalist working in the BBC that they have to write in every article about extreme weather that you can't attribute individual weather events, and so we had long discussions with the BBC that they change that and that they don't give this advice anymore to the journalists. And I think they have changed now, but it was hard work because that was a really, every journalist learned that you can't do this.
Yeah, because the BBC has always been dogged by this idea of balance, haven't they? That if you get somebody on, you have to get somebody on with the opposing view. So they'll have Nigel Lawson, God help us, talking about climate change, who's a complete climate denier, knows nothing. But that will be in the interest of balance, won't it?
Well, yes, that was the first. That, yeah, they have gotten rid of that a bit earlier. So there was, I think, I don't know. I don't want to say something very mean about the BBC, but I think that sort of changed.
We love the BBC, but
changed
they've been trying so hard.
Changed within the last 10 years, or maybe, yeah. Maybe a bit less.
No, he was on there not so long ago.
Yeah, maybe not 10 years,
Wishing
maybe five years. There was this realization that maybe this balance idea just doesn't quite work when there is facts and not. Yeah. But yeah, this line that you can't attribute individual weather events, that was this year still that they were publishing that in every article after we had done the science that you can very well do this now for 10 years.
But that's now understood.
Hopefully.
So you done your degree. You done your degree in physics in Germany. You got interested in philosophy. But how did you get into climate?
So I did my my PhD in, well, so while I was doing physics, I got interested in philosophy, and I started to do a second degree in philosophy, and then the only thing that I needed to finish that degree would have been to write the thesis, but then I would have had 2 equivalent degrees, and I thought, well, that's not very useful, so I decided to instead do a PhD in philosophy, and I wanted to look at models and what you can learn in principle from models from a sort of epistemic point of view. And when I started my PhD, I wanted to look at all sorts of models, from very theoretical social science models and economic models. But then I got really hooked on climate models and read a lot about them, learned a lot about them. And that's so my thesis then focused mainly on climate models. So that's how I got interested in that topic.
And what about this? There are often criticisms. I mean, they were levelled originally against James Lovelock when he did his early computing simulations of what he called Daisy World. That models, and these are the people, of course, who don't join any dots, and then they turn around and say, but models are not the real world.
Yeah, of course. There's this wonderful saying from John Box that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And that is very true, and that is true for Daisy World. So I think these Daisy World modeling that has been really influential in the climate modeling world. Even though, of course, we don't live in Daisy World, but this idea that you have to bring the systems together in order to actually understand what's going on, and the idea that there is that there is emergence in complex systems that you don't see if you study them on an atomic level and on an individual level. That has been really important, and that has really helped to move the science forward. And so, but I think it's still one of the most difficult questions in every climate science study is sort of, how do you decide how wrong is too wrong to actually say something useful about the world.
But we're all agreed now, A, that it's happening, because it's happening, and B, that we've got to do something about it. And then this is where it all starts to splinter and split, isn't it? What we do about it. And again, I don't know if it's a gender thing, but there's a lot of shiny solutions being offered at the moment by men. Bill Gates is backing geoengineering, isn't he? That we can, and Rex Tillerson, I think he was CEO of ExxonMobil, wasn't he? And then he became Trump's Secretary of State for Climate, something utterly mad like that. And he says that climate change is just an engineering problem. That's on record. So again, nothing else, just an engineering problem. And so in the geoengineering shiny solutions, we've got all sorts, haven't we? We've got this strange idea of clean coal, even though the coal industry is doomed. We've got the idea of carbon capture, which all in Britain, well, there's European research group people all think it's such a good idea that we won't need to do anything about climate because it'll just capture all the carbon. We've got things like firing sulfate aerosols into the air because they'll mimic the action of volcanoes and will stop the planet heating up for a while, but we don't know what they'll do to the rest of the planet. And Bill Gates seems to be putting a lot of money into what he calls the geoengineering solutions because he thinks tech will solve it. I can understand where he's coming from. But that doesn't, there is, in all of that, no sense that we, you, me, the lot of us, are going to have to change the way we do business in every sense for a while, aren't we? That we can't, it's not business as usual and tech will solve.
Yeah, and I think that's, yes, it's definitely, I think we often, Rex Tillerson is probably an extreme example of that, but I think generally we still talk, even when you listen to sort of the global climate negotiations, we talk about climate change as something, a future problem that has quite often a technical solution. And we are not really talking about that. Climate change is a social is a social problem that ultimately comes from the way we choose to get our energy, but also how we run our economic system, and that it only has social and political solutions. That it's, of course, technology is an important part of it, but technology doesn't work on its own. It only works if it is embedded in economic systems and social systems and in political systems. And so I think the world is messy, and so the solutions are messy. There's no clean technical solution and no simple, straightforward solution, but lots and lots of small solutions on all sorts of scales. But that does mean that we have to dramatically change the system, the economic system it's embedded in. I don't mean that we have to abolish capitalism, but that we have to get rid of this idea that it's based on burning fossil fuels, which is at the moment still the central source of energy.
So in your mind, there is no doubt that fossil fuels have to stop. They have to be left in the ground and we have to do something else fast.
Yes.
Not
because
slowly, fast.
Fast, yes. Because, well, carbon capture does work,
yeah,
but it's extremely expensive and it doesn't work on there's no evidence that it works on any kind of scale that we would need, that we would need for it to be a big part of the solution. It can be a small part of the solution, of the really hard to defossilize parts of energy, but it's not something that that we can just, continue to build coal-fired power plants and then just have carbon capture. That has been tried. It doesn't work.
And it won't work for coal, will it? Because coal, anyway, it's a fossil industry. It should be retired because it's not. It doesn't even break even. It's subsidised everywhere across the world, isn't it? It's a fuel that has no further use to us. If it wasn't for the subsidies, it wouldn't happen. So the idea of pouring more money into making coal cheaper just seems crazy.
Well, and I think it's also that it's not just that coal is just incredibly inefficient and that it's really accelerating climate change. It's also it's really unhealthy otherwise, and it's really not good for the people who get the coal out of the ground. It's not as if that's a fantastic and healthy job. And sort of in Germany, there's always this argument: oh, we can't get out of coal because I can't explain to the poor miner that that their job doesn't have a future. Well, their job didn't have a future 30 years ago, so that explaining could have started much earlier. But it's not as if that is has ever been, as if this fossil fuel society has ever been one that has been really good for the people who actually get the coal out or live in the next to the coal-fired power plants. When you look at the number of deaths from air pollution, that is not climate change, but that's air pollution from power plants and cars. The numbers are incredibly, and that's just, it's not as if the world is wonderful when we have fossil fuels if it wasn't for climate change.
What I'm hearing now as I'm reading science journals and trying to find out what people are saying is that there seems to be a lot of people dragging their feet, saying we have to have bridge solutions. We can't just switch our economy. Everything will collapse. We simply can't do this because there'll be so much human catastrophe. As though there isn't going to be human catastrophe in any case. But if you were in charge, if you were a Boris Johnson, if you were world queen, and you had absolute control, and you could say, all right, we're switching, we're getting away from fossil fuels now, we're doing it. How fast do you think we do have to do it? What would you be saying? 5 years, 10 years, 2 years? This is you as world queen.
Well, this is you, me as world queen. I just need some advisors who would who would actually give me some very, very strong facts and numbers in order to decide that. But I think what we I don't want to be world queen, and I don't even want to think about this. But I think what we need to do, and what we have to do is, so what we do at the moment is, we have an energy crisis because we don't have gas from Russia anymore. So let's switch back on the coal-fired power plants so that we can so that we still have energy. And that might be that this is on a very, very short time scale even a good solution. But it is not a good solution if you don't do everything else as well. If you don't say, okay, but if we do that, then we have to make sure that we dramatically increase the speed with which we build wind parks, that we have a big program, that we insulate our homes, that we have people that we can train people to the skills to redesign our cities, and that we make some really big, fast changes towards a more a carbon neutral future, which is just what we don't do. We always forget. Well, then when there is the next problem, we always forget the last problem. It's always that one crisis is played against the other.
Is 2050 too late?
For what?
For us.
It's never too late. It's always every decision you make for burning fossil fuels longer is we just let more people die from heat waves. We let more people suffer from extremely high food prices because of change of the effects to agriculture and to globe. So it's never. Every decision is always if we run this power plant longer, then we just let more people die. And so in that case, it's not as if there is, if we have net zero in 2050, that would be, that would mean that no one would suffer, or that we don't have to adapt. Or, so there is not this cliff at 1.5 degree global temperature that we fall down. It's already at 1.2 degrees that we have right now, that people die. Many people have died, have lost their livelihoods. And if we have 1.6 degree, then more people will die, but it's not fun. I hate the movie Don't Look Up because it's not an asteroid. It is already here. And it is what climate change is doing. It's increasing inequality in our societies. It is those who are the poor in any society, in this heat wave we just had in the UK, it's people who live in poor housing and badly insulated houses that have poor health, bad education, that die in these heat waves. It's not the Tories. And it's when we have heat waves in India and South Asia that lead to India putting on a wheat export ban, and food prices go high. It's the poorest in Britain, the poorest in Somalia who pay the price for that. So that is what climate change is. It is increasing inequality. It's not. There is no asteroid. There is no physical monster that will suddenly appear. And I think that's why it's never too late. There will always be people who are fine, if you are rich enough, you have no problem with climate change. That's a sad reality, but that's the case.
Well, we're seeing, aren't we, that the rich are indeed looking after themselves and buying up large tracts of land around the world, in New Zealand and elsewhere, where they think they can be safe. Peter Thiel is a great, he's the PayPal guy, great advocate of seasteading, where you will start to live on the sea, which also means you don't have to pay tax because you're not in any jurisdiction. So he doesn't mind if sea levels rise because he's already working out a way that he can have these Wi-Fi enabled Noah's Arks for rich people, where they can carry on and everything will be absolutely fine in the bits that they're not buying up. And then we've got prepper communities all over America, haven't we? It's a strange phenomenon, partly to do with their pioneering Western ideas and also their utter paranoia, where they are also buying up tracts of land, buying up bunkers where they can put themselves and their family, waiting for end times. One of the things that we were discussing when we were talking about it before we came to talk to you is that human beings have always been fascinated by the idea of end time, the apocalypse, Armageddon. You know, in Hindu religion, the world will end in a sheet of fire, and then of course it will be remade. But interestingly, in that Hindu tradition, their apocalypse is preceded by 100-year drought, and then the world goes up in flames. And for the Norse people, it was going to be a new ice age, and then that would be the end of the world. You know full well from the Bible. We all went down with the ark, supposedly, in the waters, but the last one, the true end time, as in the book of Revelation, is going to be a fireball as the world rolls up. And then the saved are saved and the damned are not. So that's going to be a version of, how rich are you? But we have it, it's so deep within us, the end time mythologies. And for me as a writer, I'm fascinated by these things, these stories that we tell ourselves, but about our beginnings, our origin stories, and about our ends. And these things cannot be separated. And there is this fatefulness that runs through humanity, wherever you find us, whatever place, whatever shape, whatever time. People are thinking about the end of the world. I grew up in a religious household, so we were always in end time. We used to do drills for it and hide under the stairs. We used to do rehearsals of the last trump, so that if only there was a last trump. I thought we'd seen the last of the trumps. But anyway, we were doing the last trumpet that would blow before Jesus came back. Mrs. Winterson loved the idea of end time, so this would have been, her moment. But that sort of thinking, where even if people are not aware of it, and remember that the most dangerous ideologies are the unconscious ones, the things that we're not aware of in ourselves and in our world. If that is there, and I think it is, you were telling me there's people in Germany who think they are the last generation. This is absolute end time stuff. And there are, I was looking at climate change communications things for in the States, and it's, I just want to get this figure right because it's so mad. 11% of Americans already think that there is nothing we can do or should do because the Bible has said that the world has to end, that time and space will roll up like a ball, and that's that. And so you can't interfere with God's will. 11% of Americans is a lot. So if we have the stories we tell ourselves, we know this now, we're becoming more and more aware of this, aren't we? That the stories we tell and who tells the stories, how the stories are changed or how they're not, really influences what happens in our world. Because, yes, it's to do with tech. Yes, it's to do with science. Yes, it's to do with politics. It's all netted in there. But it's also the stories that we tell to one another that are passed down generationally, that live within us, that we may or may not be aware of, and how we change that. And so, for me, as a fiction writer, I'm fascinated by how we move our mindsets, not into a kind of magical thinking. I don't want that. I don't want there to be this fake binary of either it's magical thinking and everything's going to work out, or it's Armageddon and nothing's going to work out. In the middle of all that, getting away from thousands of years of every culture saying it's the end, has to be a way where perhaps we do begin again. And because that's what's so lovely actually about all these stories. The end is only the end so that there's another beginning. And so maybe that's something we have to find, because maybe this is an end of some kind. But then we have to believe that there's a new beginning coming through, don't we? We're talking about Wagner. I love Wagner. I think we were a bit horrified yesterday. At the end of the Ring cycle, everything just is a disaster. And this Gotterdammer on fire. Everything collapses. The earth, Valhalla, the Nibelungen messing about down below. The whole thing's gone, boom. But the end of that piece of music, I don't know if you listen to the end of it. You should, because you've got all the trumpets, everything Wagner can throw at it, the biggest orchestras anybody's ever seen. And now I sound like Donald Trump. Nobody's ever seen an orchestra this big. Well, that was Wagner, not Trump. At the end, there's just this harp, and it starts again. The Rhine maidens have all gone back into the river with the Rhine gold. Everybody fought over it forever, and nobody could possess it. And they didn't understand that. And then it goes back into the natural world. 4.5 billion years of this planet. She doesn't need us. She'll start again. And sometimes I think, have we just been telling this story endlessly? Have we always got here? And we're going to have to fucking well start again. Just at the moment when so much that we've made, so much that we've done could lead us off into that real utopia, into an equal world for the many and not the few. It's all in place, but our minds aren't. So how do we deal with the stories we tell? Is that my problem?
That's your problem. But yeah, I think we need to somehow get away from the idea that everything has to be destroyed before we can start again. So I don't mind Wagner, but I don't think I want all of that before we then can have the single harp. But I think that is the really hard thing, because it's just not such a powerful story to say that we all have a lot of agency, but it's usually it's usually not very dramatic.
But this is right now, things are pretty dramatic, aren't they?
Yes, but what every single one can do, and I think when you experience this is it for individuals it's dramatic, but for individuals it also has been dramatic. Extreme weather has been dramatic even without climate change. So it's not as if that is something really actually fundamentally different. And I think either some of us still wait for something that will feel fundamentally different, and that's just not going to happen. It's not the asteroid, or it's this, okay, this is the end, and so we just have to wait for it to eat us, and then we see. But I think both stories don't give us this, okay, we actually have the agency to change things. We don't have to die in heat waves. It's not, you can, there are ways that you can keep your body temperature lower, that you don't die in heat waves. You can build cities in a way that many, many more people survive in heat waves. And but we
But
have
that will be a new beginning, won't it? I mean, it will be bye-bye to 250 years from the Industrial Revolution onwards, everything we've known about this time. I mean, if you take that as the point where we shift from cottage industry and agricultural societies into an industrialized society and onwards, in the salami slice of space-time, and then in that short 250 years, it's nothing. And we've got from there to here. Maybe that does have to reach an end, to say, in the sense that we say this isn't sustainable. We're not going to look for any more brown coal. We're not going to look for any more black oil.
Oh, it absolutely has to end. But
Yeah.
do you think? Yeah. So, what story do we need to tell that it ends today?
I think it needs to. Yeah, I think we do need a really imaginative set of stories about how we can live differently because we have to, which includes, as you say, building cities which are resilient to rising temperatures, managing the fact that sea levels, whether we like it or not, are going to come up, aren't they? Because carbon dioxide means it gets hotter and then the sea rises. Is that right? Or is that stupid?
No, that's not stupid. So the sea. So
Yeah.
we can do a lot about the temperatures. So when we stop burning fossil fuels today, then global mean temperature will stop basically at 1.2 degrees, because that's a very linear relationship between the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and the temperature, and it's pretty quick response. And that also means that if we stop burning fossil fuels today, then the 40 degrees in London will still be a relatively rare event. We will not go back, but we can stop it from getting worse. But with sea levels, the oceans respond much slower to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and to the temperatures. So they will rise for the next centuries to come. But also, still, how high they will go eventually is still dependent on how much fossil fuels we will continue to burn. So even there is some agency. We can't stop them from rising right now as we can with the temperatures, but there's still stuff we can do even about sea levels.
But we're going to get some lost cities of Atlantis, aren't we? I mean,
Yes.
some of it's going back in there to become the stuff of new myths and new legends of who we are under there in that watery world. But if there's two, for me anyway, thinking about this, leaving aside the kind of the fancy, shiny, geoengineered solutions that the boys seem to like at the moment, what can individuals do, and what should governments be doing to try and just ameliorate this situation?
I think what individuals can do is is what we do right now, to talk about it, to educate themselves and educate others that it's not an asteroid. It's not that all the tipping points have been tipped and it's too late to do anything and that we are doomed, but that actually by stopping to burn fossil fuels now, we can avoid a lot of the really bad consequences on the one hand, and on the other hand, we can adapt to a lot. So people live in parts of the world that are used to much higher temperatures and don't die all the time. So we can design cities in a way that people don't die from heat. So both of these things, we have these solutions, and I think that's as individuals, it's not that we buy a bamboo toothbrush or that we feel smug about not flying and berate our neighbors if they fly. But what we can do is to use all the spheres of influence that we have to change how things are governed. So it's always what does governments have to do? And of course, on a national level, it's the national governments. And we have definitely a problem with the electoral system in this country to influence that in a meaningful way. But it's not, national governments are not the only decision-making body in the world. You can, if you have cities where you can vote and where you can be a governor, or you can, and every one of us has these spheres of influences. You might be a parent and you're a governor at a school, so you can make sure that the school's priority is, first of all, to insulate their buildings so that the children are safe in the next heat wave, but also that sort of the way that the school is run is carbon neutral. That's possible. And some others have other spheres of influence. They might be the CEO of a company and can make sure that that company is run in a way that is actually in line with climate goals. So I think that's what individuals can do. It's not about what we consume. It's about the decisions that we make and the where we implement policy, and we all implement some policies in some shape or form.
It's optimistic. Now it's over to you.